And welcome to episode 111 of the Redman Group, special episode with special guest, Dr. Shawn T. Smith, returning panelist to the show and alumnus speaker of the 21 Convention. I'm Anthony Dream Johnson, co-founder of the Redman Group, CEO of 21 Studios, and CEO of the 21 Convention, and founder of the 22 Convention for Women coming up soon in Orlando, Florida. So again, today's guest is Dr. Shawn T. Smith. I'm going to pull him on here at the show in just a minute. He's a clinical psychologist based out of Colorado and Denver, Colorado. And he's also the author of several books, probably which most of you know him from. The Tactical Guide to Women. It's my personal autographed signed copy. So this is a book he's most well known for in the manosphere community, but he's written many other books beyond that we are going to get into today, such as The User's Guide to the Human Mind, which inspired the title of this episode. He's also the author of some books you guys probably don't know about for women, including The Practical Guide to Men and The Woman's Guide to How Men Think. He actually has more books beyond this. A lot of guys in the manosphere don't know about. I just ordered another one I found. I was digging through this book, I think, or the other blue one. And I think it's Surviving Aggressive People, which is kind of interesting. And I'm looking forward to getting it. I just ordered it. And I think it's going to be focused on basically surviving people with personality disorders in the workplace and other areas of life. Anyway, without further ado, please let me welcome back to the show, Dr. Shawn T. Smith.
Morning, Anthony.
How you doing, man?
Good. You've got the whole collection there. I don't even have those books.
I think it's almost. I found another one too. You have like a Chinese version of one of these books.
The User's Guide got translated into I don't know how many languages, 20 languages or something. So I've got a Korean version and a Japanese version. I don't know what all, but that's kind of neat.
It's interesting, though, in the manosphere that you're pretty much known almost exclusively for the Tactical Guide to Women, understandably, because it's all men looking to understand women half the time, or most of the time. But you have a lot of books, and I don't even think do you have more that I still haven't found yet? I keep digging on Amazon.
Those are all of them. And the Tactical Guide, that's my baby. Like that's the one that I'm proud of. That's the one I think that has the most positive impact. I still like that book. And Surviving Aggressive People, that was my first book, and part of that was part of my doctoral dissertation. When I was, the program that I went through, you didn't do a traditional dissertation. You could do that, or you could do something more clinically oriented. And so part of that book was helping staff at this rehab center in Texas called the Institute for Rehab and Rehabilitation for people with traumatic brain injury and spine injury and so forth. And one of the things that comes out of that kind of injury is emotional lability and impulse control problems. And so I helped design a curriculum for staff to deal with patients when they got a little out of control and aggressive and frustrated. But there's also a big street component to that one, where it's just dealing with people who are getting aggressive because they feel cornered or because they're being bullies and they're just trying to get up on somebody. And so, I like that book too.
And that'll be useful for guys, is I correct to say that'll be useful for guys navigating the workplace, maybe with a boss who's being over-aggressive or has something like that?
Some basic skills in there that everybody needs to have for dealing with bullies. And this was stuff that I started picking up at my dad's bar when I was 9 years old. My dad was really good. It was kind of a rough bar. My dad was really good at handling people. He was the kind of guy that could 86 you and make you feel like he's doing you a favor. Nice. Which was a really good skill to have.
Yeah. Wow. I'm interested to get it. Yeah, I just saw it and I was like, I bet I'm going to pick that up. So let's get into some questions. I have a whole list of questions related to the books and beyond that. Happy to have you back on the show and we'll go through all this. But I hope it's a lot of fun for you. It's kind of a hot take thing. And we'll see where it wanders and where it goes.
I got hot takes. On everything.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay. So right off the bat, I mean, this whole year has been really, really wild. That seems to be a pretty consensus opinion at this point from just about everyone in America and around the world even, right?
Yeah.
From day one, or almost from day one, early in the year, it's just been super wild. So what is kind of as a psychologist, what is your kind of basic response to the mass response of the population to this pandemic? We've seen a lot of government, different states have been doing different government regulations. Different people have been responding in different ways. You have the pro-mask people, you have the anti-mask people, you have all kinds of lockdown stuff. But I'm interested in it from a psychology point of view. Like my concern is basically at this point, people are overreacting from like a hindbrain standpoint. That they're afraid of something that maybe the data doesn't really support, and they're kind of locked in that mode. So do you have any thoughts on that and the kind of mass response to this disease and how people have been responding?
Yeah, well, just watching this for the last few months, some of it I could have never predicted. Some of it I should have predicted, but didn't. But
Okay.
people do kind of lock in on their issue and their thing that they're concerned about,
Yeah.
and everything else be damned. It's kind of how our brains are built. We focus on one problem, and that's the problem. Like trying to. My wife just trying to get in for a checkup at our insurance company here and can't do it because apparently we only treat COVID now. Like nothing else exists. And so,
Wow.
just I'm exaggerating, but she can't get in for just basic stuff because that organization does what people do and is locked in on one particular issue and to the exclusion of everything else. And there's a big cost to that. There are people who have problems that aren't getting treated because our
Yeah.
health system is kind of locked down on this one
And this is
issue.
like a
But
general practitioner office.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
it's Kaiser Permanente, which is a big bureaucratic thing.
Okay.
So and it's acting like a bureaucracy, which is what it's supposed to do, I guess. But looking at some of like the riots and so forth, this is one of the things that I think in hindsight I should have been able to see because
Hmm.
you take a bunch of young people, lock them in their parents' basement with nothing but social media so that they can marinate in whatever ideology they're marinating in because the social media just feeds you whatever's going to make you angry. And then a couple months later, there's a spark in this big tinderbox and the whole
Yeah.
country goes up. And it's not surprising to me
Yeah.
now in retrospect that we see a lot of young people out there just kind of tearing the place down.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been super wild. And I thought about that too when that popped off. I was like, all these people have been locked up in their home for months, for that most of the country. And even not only locked up in your home and you're viewing social media feeds that kind of feed what you already believe because you
Yeah.
follow people that you like, obviously.
Yeah.
Unless you just hate follow people. I don't know. I guess some people do that. I'm sure you have some haters that follow you, and I know I do.
Everybody does, I guess.
Yeah, but even like the gym shutting down was the thing I thought of immediately. Is like, yeah, no one's been able to physically exert themselves. A lot of men, gyms are popular today. 50 years ago, that wasn't really the case. The modern fitness club didn't quite exist. It does now, and no one can go lift weights, male or female. They can't go on an elliptical or a treadmill or lift dumbbells or something. And yeah, so it's like boom, this like physical energy just kind of burst out. Speaking of the riots, though, what are your thoughts on? This is another question I want to get into, and I would like to revisit some of the pandemic stuff more generally. But with Fatherhood, you mentioned the riots. So you've been a clinical psychologist for a long, long time. And I know you've talked about, you did a whole speech on fatherhood at our convention last year, the Patriarch event. So what is the connection between the riots that we've seen and the looting and like the really violent element of the protests? Not all of course, was that, but a good chunk of it was, it seems, throughout the country. Whole cities have been burning down. What is the connection between that and the epidemic of single motherhood and fatherlessness and the broken family? For example, for the audience that may not know, at this point, I think 75% in the Black community throughout America, 75% of children are born to unwed unwed parents. So they're born out of wedlock at this point. So what's the connection there between fatherlessness, single motherhood, and the riots?
Well, I'll qualify this by saying you're just getting one guy's opinion, and it's just my personal opinion. I always separate my clinical opinion from my personal opinion because if I'm in the clinic and I'm working with someone individually on an anxiety disorder, I'm working with a couple or something, my professional opinion goes one way, and I tend to keep it pretty informed. My personal opinion, that's what you're getting right now, just one guy who's watching all this. But what I see that really concerns me is, well, first of all, there are people out there who have legitimate things to be worried about, like. There are issues out there that people are legitimately upset about. I get that. It doesn't justify destroying things and tearing up your own neighborhood and hurting your neighbors and so forth. And one of the things that's really troubling to me that I see going on right now is the cancel culture, where you can have your career, you can have your life destroyed by expressing the wrong opinion, using the wrong words. I mean, you know how it's working right now. You have to, if you have a job in corporate America, you really have to tiptoe. And I'm hearing from guys that are just they're just on pins and needles or walking on eggshells because they know that if they say the wrong thing, they can lose their job and so forth. And if you follow people in academia, they're talking about the purges that are going on right now. So there's all of this shaming that's going on in our society. It's shaming, it's dredging up the past, going through your Twitter feed and finding something you said 10 years ago and using it against you. And that there's this situation where you can't win with certain people. So I'll give you an example, and I'm going to work back around to your answer. So
Sure.
There's this yoga studio here in Denver. There's a guy who has several yoga studios. I think it was called Kindness Yoga, and he was a very liberal, very woke kind of guy. The guy that owned these properties. And for whatever reason, the woke mob decided that he needed to be taken down. And their justification was that he was engaged in, what did they call it? They called it performative activism, which is nothing. It's just their contrived way of being offended. And so they went after him. They tore him down. He ended up closing his studios. And after he closed his studios, he did all the things you're supposed to do all the things the mob says you're supposed to do when they come after you. He was apologetic. He said, I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to be a better person. Help me with this. I'm trying to understand what I'm doing wrong here. And so guess what the woke mob did then? They doubled down on him. They came after him even harder because you can't apologize to the mob. So there's this shaming, no-win attitude out there.
They're like sharks. They smell blood when you apologize.
They are, yeah. And it's like, there's this, it's like they're a group of hyenas out on the savannah, and they're being the a-holes of the savannah, right? And they're just trying to steal food and do what hyenas do. And then one of them gets a broken leg, and now suddenly he's the victim and he's lunching. I don't even know if hyenas stoop that low, but that's what happens with this crowd. Like, he was the hyena with the broken leg now, and they were going to destroy him.
Well, look at J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter series. Yeah. Even she's close to uncancelable, but they're trying,
right? Because
she's now opposed. She has criticisms of trans stuff and all that, specifically in favor of women's rights and what she believes to be, women's issues, and they're coming after her hard.
Yeah, she has an opinion.
So, yeah, and how dare she have an opinion? Yeah. How dare you?
I don't even know what her opinion is really, because I haven't followed, but I know what's happening with her, that she was very woke, and then she stepped 1 inch out of line.
Yep.
And then suddenly now she's the target. So what are we seeing in society? We're seeing, in my estimation, a very feminine, the dark side of the feminine. So, so let me talk about kids for a minute. So when you see kids on the playground, they're playing with each other. Boys and girls play differently. And there's a dark side and an upside to each of those genders. And so when boys are playing, they roughhouse.
Which genders? The 2 or the 400 or which ones?
I'm just talking male, female. Like, you can, I know there are people that want to break it down further. I'm going to keep it real simple.
I'm just fucking. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So when you see boys playing, what are they doing? They're roughhousing. They're busting each other's chops. They're, they play pretty rough, and and they're also very cooperative. Little boys are extremely cooperative, like way more so than girls. If you watch groups of boys,
that might be like build things. Like when I was a kid, we would build forts and stuff like that. You mean?
Yeah, building things together, team sports together. There's all this cooperativeness, and some of that gets tied back to, in the literature, to testosterone, just the effects of having this hormone in our body. We keep boys and men key in on each other when they're on the same team. So anyway, when things are going well for boys, they're playing rough, but they're doing it in a way that builds each other up. Like if you're playing team sports, little boys are always trying to build each other up and challenge each other and get better. When boys are unhappy, they're unfocused, they're bored, they're miserable, things aren't going well at home or school, whatever, then that energy can turn, and that building each other up turns into tearing each other down. And then you see similar behaviors where boys are roughhousing with each other and so forth, but they're doing it in a way to destroy each other. So that's the dark side of the masculine. The dark side of the feminine on the playground is similar but different. So when you see little girls playing together, they tend to play in dyads, and whereas with boys can come and go, a pair. So two girls will be talking and playing, and then for another girl to break into that dyad is kind of tough, but they don't, they cooperate in their own way. They play in their own way. It tends to be a lot more verbal. It tends to be a lot more in the imagination, whereas when boys play, it tends to be more in the physical world. And so when girls are playing together nicely and everything's going well, they kind of build each other up. But when the feminine turns dark, when those girls are unhappy, when things aren't going well at home, when they're bored, when they're miserable, when things aren't going well at school, whatever it is, then that feminine energy turns real dark. And whereas boys will try to tear each other down physically, girls will try to psychologically destroy each other. There's backbiting, there's shaming, there's ostracizing. I mean, just
rumors and torment. Manipulation.
Rumors, dredging up the past, all this stuff, just psychological torment. So
the knives come out.
Mm-hmm. And so when girls are tearing each other down, they do it that way. And so I think, here's my one guy's opinion. When I'm looking at what's going on with cancel culture, and what's going on with all the hostility and the tension out there, it all feels very feminine to me. It all feels like the dark side of the feminine has really taken over with the shaming and the backbiting and the no-win situations and the double binds and the rumors and the digging up the past. It's not a very masculine darkness. It's a very feminine darkness. And so I think that part of what's missing in society right now is just that masculine balance. And it's not the masculine stepping in and controlling the feminine. It's just providing balance, because we need both sides of this equation.
So this is a pretty interesting observation. I hadn't thought of it this way. So would this be related to, for example, then 100 years plus of feminism that has been, at this point, vilifying men, vilifying masculinity? I know you, for example, you're very critical of the APA when they tried to basically demonize old school masculinity.
Yes. Shaming men. Yes.
Yeah, they came very close, I think, to declaring it a mental disorder. My understanding, they didn't go that far.
If you connect the dots, you read their guidelines for working with boys and men. You connect the dots. Yeah, masculinity is.
This reminds me too, though, of even comedians I grew up watching, like George Carlin. Mm-hmm. They would joke about the pussification of America and the American male and stuff, and it's like, well, here we go. So it makes a lot of sense, though, to your observation. In my head, there's a direct connection here. Pussification of the American male, to put it bluntly, or in a comedic sense. And then
so whose fault is that? Is that women's fault? Is that feminine's fault, or is it men's fault for allowing it to happen?
Or is it both?
Yeah, it's both, because we work together. I tend to think more that the responsibility falls to men to say enough. You're not going to shame me into silence. You're not going to do this psychological torment. It's not going to work on me.
To lead. Yeah, responsibility to lead. There's somewhere I wanted to take this, but now my head or brain fart on it. Son of a bitch.
I'm talking too much. That's what the problem is.
No, it's good. It's good, man. This is really good. Can you be more specific on fatherlessness, though, as it's affected, you think? So you're saying now there's a feminine side to the riots, and it's the dark side of the feminine, not the more positive, nurturing, caring, the more positive elements of femininity. So what is the more specific connection with, to me, it looks like when I see the Antifa in the street, burning stuff down or beating people up, and then even the Black community burning down their neighborhoods, burning down, AutoZone, Arby's. It's like, what did AutoZone do? Nothing. AutoZone, is innocent, of course. What is the connection there, though, for the audience that is not familiar with your work, to growing up in a home, being raised by a single mother and without a father, which has become very common in America? Nationwide, I think over the past 100 years, it went from like 2% to like 40% now across the whole population.
How could it not have an effect? And if I was a real Freudian guy, which I'm not, but I would look at the fact that the store they burned down was a store where men hang out. It's the AutoZone. You'll see a whole lot of women in there. It's kind of a masculine store, but that's just fun speculation. I don't really.
That's actually kind of interesting. Yeah, I haven't seen any Victoria's Secrets burned down, so
right.
Maybe, but I haven't seen any.
You see a lot of guys in Victoria's Secret too getting that last minute gift, but So I don't put a lot of stock in that. It's just kind of fun to think about. But how can it not have an effect? Like, if you've got a kid, a young man who had strong masculine guidance, and when some people hear strong masculine guidance, they hear overbearing, aggressive, rude. Now, I'm just talking about being a strong presence. What do fathers do? They tend to be, good fathers are warm, they're joking, they're playful, and they provide structure. So if you've got a father who's warm and he provides structure, what's the odds that you're going to go out and throw a Molotov cocktail at an AutoZone? It's pretty low.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good way to. There's been a lot of Molotovs getting thrown around. I forgot about that. Yeah, God, what a wild year, man.
It is.
For me, I started off with Make Women Great Again, and then before I knew it, the world was burning down. The economy was collapsing. There's Molotovs getting thrown at cop cars. There's mass riots in the streets. There's talk of civil war. It's like, holy shit. Yeah. This year has gotten real wild.
It's like we were living in a tinderbox and didn't even know it. And then it was kind of a perfect storm with the lockdowns and then this cop that murders a poor innocent guy. I don't care what you want to say about that tape. That was cold-blooded murder. And
it was pretty brutal. Yeah, that was the thing too. Though, it was interesting just from a political standpoint with that cop. Like if you look at the Rodney King riots from 1992, I think it was, that I think happened when there was like a final court ruling and there was an actual trial and stuff. And then he, whatever happened with the cops getting off or something. But with this cop who did this, it was bad and it was on film. But then he was fired immediately. He was arrested like a day later. He's being charged with, a criminal murder, third-degree murder. Then it got escalated to second-degree murder. The other cops were fired, and then they got charged. It's like this all happened very, very fast. And that to me is the justice system working to correct what seems to be and appears to be, from an observer standpoint, very, very bad behavior by a police officer with a long track record of bad behavior too, which is a bigger problem.
Yeah, this is not. Yeah, it is a bigger problem.
Yeah, I did ask Ken Curry, by the way, on the show if he had any non-legally binding opinions about the cop Derek Chauvin, because when I see that as an armchair psychologist with no clinical schooling or academic schooling of it at all, I see a guy with like a 17-year track record of abusive complaints. I'm like, yeah, that screams like a cluster B disorder or something. This is aggressive behavior that's being repeated over time and not stopping. The stopping is like a political element to a bureaucratic thing maybe, but him doing it personally, like that's really alarming. Do you have any non-legally binding opinions on Derek and what he like? Will he be investigated or will he be examined by a psychologist maybe?
I
In
would
court?
imagine that would be part of the legal defense or the legal, probably the legal defense.
Prosecution.
But
Okay.
I haven't really dug into him enough, his case enough to know what's going on. I know he's got this long track record. I know that him and
Yeah.
George Floyd had a personal beef, which to my mind that makes it first degree murder. But
Damn.
the larger question to me is, why did this bad egg just sit there and rot for all these years when, where's that calm masculine energy within the system to say, you know what, buddy, you need to go find a different job because
Yep.
this doesn't work for you.
Yeah. By the way, I figured out where I wanted to take it. Duh, it's sitting right in front of me. Of course, right? It'll be this. So you're mentioning cancel culture and mentioning the dark side of the feminine, things like that. This is an article I found yesterday from Jack Murphy. He tweeted from Reason.com, and I've not actually read into the study yet that they're citing, but they're citing some study that came out. Narcissists, psychopaths, and manipulators are more likely to engage in virtuous victim signaling, says study. And this to me would be analogous as well to cancel culture, which usually comes hand in hand. They're canceling you because they want a virtue signal and they want to get approval from their in group, their in tribe. Does this make sense to you at a basic level, as a psychologist and as an adult?
Yeah, at a gut level, it does. I would have to qualify it by saying these studies, especially when psychology and politics intersect in any kind of study, you really have to take it with a grain of salt.
Got it.
And also, these are very small effect sizes usually they get measured. I haven't looked at the study, but if you classify virtue signaling as a manipulative behavior, which I do, because it's a way to gain power, it kind of makes sense that somebody who has that dark triad trait, it might fall under the heading of Machiavellianism.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to read into it as well, and I sent it to Richard Grannon. Speaking of Richard Grannon, actually, that was one of the questions I have on my list here for you. So Richard Grannon first spoke at the 21 Convention last year. He was supposed to speak in 2018, actually, but then he had like a ear problem at the last minute. And he filmed his speech, and then we actually published it anyway on his own, and it did really well. It's got like 500,000 views. But when he first appeared at our conference, that was his real entry to the manosphere. And his main speech at the convention was on C-PTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's not something he created. That's something that he, though, is a big advocate of. I think it's been around since at least the late 80s or early 90s. It's advocated by certain therapists and psychologists like Pete Walker, who wrote the book called C-PTSD. What is your take on C-PTSD that Richard now has introduced more formally to the manosphere? Your take on it in any way you want to look at it, but my main point of view of it would be as a conceptual model. Because like Richard talks a lot about, and I'm sure you would say, like, having a antisocial personality disorder is typically, there's no blood test for it. You don't have like a virus that says like, oh, like you're an antisocial psychopath, you're a fucking narcissist or whatever, right? You're, a borderline. These are things that are behaviorally, and they have to be diagnosed in a personal one-on-one setting.
Yeah.
But CPTSD, I think it's a pretty amazing, pretty useful model. And it's not formally accepted yet either, as far as I understand it, in like the DSM and APA and stuff like that. So what's your take on CPTSD?
Yeah, I'm thinking about the DSM, and the DSM, it comes from the American Psychiatric Association, not the American Psychological Association. It's a different APA.
Okay.
And the way they come up with their diagnoses is kind of by committee. So there's some pluses and minuses to that. But that aside, I'm a little bit envious of the way that Richard Grannon is able to speak so eloquently about personality issues and about CPTSD. And he uses this term, emotional flashback, that I'd never heard before I heard it come out of his mouth. And it describes so nicely one of the things that can happen when you're traumatized, so let's define traumatized. It means that your brain, this organ up here, has learned that something out there is dangerous, and you can learn it from one incident, or you can learn it from a collection of incidents, or you can do it to yourself. You see guys in the manosphere who, and I want to be careful when I say this because I don't know how accurate that is, but I see guys who appear to me to have traumatized themselves essentially by going out, and it doesn't have to be in the manosphere. This is kind of human behavior. You go out and you find all the horror stories, and you're doing that in the service of protecting yourself, right? So it's not a pathological behavior necessarily. You're just trying to figure out what's dangerous in the world.
Are you referring to the reticular activating system, I think it's called, where you basically seek out, kind of like in a biased way, things that you already believe?
Well, the reticular activating system is a part of your brain that's way down deep inside, and one of the things that it does that's kind of relevant here, and I don't know all the things that it does, but it filters information.
Okay.
So you have, there's this professor that I had when I was an undergrad, and he talked about the reticular activating system as one of his favorite pieces of brain biology, and how it filters information, because you know how you can. There's all kinds of information coming in, but it doesn't all make it up to verbal awareness because it would be overwhelming. And so he talked about the part of the reticular activating system that really does the managing is the ascending reticular activating system, or the ARAS. And his joke was up your ARAS to get you to remember that this process is always going on. But anyway,
nice.
So you can traumatize yourself essentially by filtering out, and this is more of an active process than an automatic process, and by filtering out half of the equation, which is that life is also pretty good. Yeah, there's a lot of dangerous stuff, and yeah, relationships in this context, and we're talking about the manosphere, relationships can be incredibly dangerous, and you need to understand that, and you need to know how that works. But you can't forget about the other side, because you'll traumatize yourself. Or somebody who, I think a more common example would be somebody who grows up with that mother or father who's an abusive narcissist, and then they go out and they repeat that relationship because they know how to do it. I'm not into fancy explanations of you're trying to reconstruct your past or whatever. I think those are fine, but I'm more of a very basic kind of guy, and I tend to think that people just do what they know how to do. And so when you know how to do an abusive relationship beyond the receiving end of that, then you go out and you find it because other people find you because they know how to do the other end of that relationship. And so
would you say that people seek out what they're familiar with?
They do what they know how to do. So
okay,
if this isn't the case for me, but if I grew up with a mother who was extremely narcissistic and she put me in situations where there was no way that I could possibly win, like everything I did was a failure. And so I developed this desire and this habit to try to please her. I'm always trying to please her. I'm always trying to get that moving goalpost that keeps moving, and I can't get it. But that's my MO. Like that's how I've learned how to do relationships. Or it could be my father too. It doesn't have to be my mother. So then I go out and I start dating. Well, what's my MO? I have already learned that I need to try to please. I need to try to find moving goalposts and try to satisfy those requirements. So that's what I'm not necessarily what I'm going to be looking for. But if I encounter somebody who has the other side of that equation, we're going to fit together very nicely, because I know how to do what that other person is doing, which is to give me moving goalposts and put me in no-win situations.
It's like puzzle pieces. It's like puzzle pieces coming together.
Yeah.
What also comes to mind as a thought when you're going through this is that if you grew up in that kind of environment, and I had not exactly what you're saying, but very violent, abusive childhood, both parents. That's a behavior pattern now that, like you're saying, in a supplicating sense or a fawning sense, as Richard Grandin would say.
Yeah.
That's a behavior pattern that you've ingrained for 15, 20 years by the time you're in your early 20s.
Yes. Behavior pattern is a perfect word. Yeah.
Yeah. Like hard. I mean, that's repetitive. If you lived at home and both parents are around, I mean, that's every day or close to it for 20 years. It's like brainwashing. It's like brainwashing yourself.
Yeah.
Based on what you're saying,
a lot of work to learn how to not do that.
How to undo it. Yeah. Another question I had. So you're saying the manosphere guys, I know what you're saying, but I've been in the manosphere for a long time, and I've seen a million, I don't know about millions, but thousands of posts of guys doing this, from the pickup community to the red pill community to the MGTOW community, all of it, right? even the MRAs in terms of divorce and things like that. I agree with you that, all of it's very serious. There's a lot of like huge problems with this stuff. But is this related as well to kind of, as the manosphere would say, stepping on your own dick or stepping on your own foot? Is that a crude way to put it, what you're saying? In terms of traumatizing yourself?
I'm thinking about that statement. Yeah, it could mean that, but you're going, yeah, traumatizing yourself. I think of, yeah, I don't really know exactly what that phrase means, but it could definitely mean you're going out and finding things to be upset about.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, the way you're saying is it's a little more, I think what you're referring to is a little bit more almost intentional without knowing it than stepping on your own foot, which might be more accidental, like shooting yourself in the foot, with a woman or a date or whatever.
Yeah, making choices that you should know better than to make versus going out because you're concerned about a thing. So you're going to go out and you're going to read all the horror stories. And then you're going to start telling yourself horror stories. And then pretty soon the whole world is one big horror story.
Yeah, and before you know it, you're screaming on YouTube, repeal the 19th, the women are evil, we're all doomed. I see this every day on YouTube, like all these comments.
Yeah. Well, so getting back to the PTSD,
yeah,
it's a beautiful concept. And I love the way Richard Grannon explains it to men because one of the, I love my profession. I have a love-hate relationship with my profession. But the part that I love about it is that the clinical side of my profession, they tend to be helpers, obviously. They're very concerned about making the world a better place. I don't always agree with how they do it, but that's their concern. They don't tend to speak to men very clearly. And Richard speaks to men very clearly. And it's just beautiful to watch. And so he explains this concept of how you can get into a situation through your own doing or through the doing of others where the emotional side of your mind is driving the bus and you're not really making your own choices. And that's kind of how I think of C-PTSD is ultimately it's making the decisions for you rather than you making conscious, aware decisions.
Yeah. I really like as well the conceptual way the way he describes it in the speech and on his YouTube channel as well. He describes C-PTSD as opposed to PTSD as more of like a scatter shot, like a bird shot out of a shotgun trauma, which so small things happening over time or a long period of time, versus PTSD as we would know it in the movies and stuff, where it's like a Vietnam vet or an Iraqi war vet who went through a particularly intense situation, combat, somebody died, somebody burned alive. And then that makes for a good movie and it's easy for people to understand. But 15 years of abuse in a bad marriage or toxic relationship with your family or something, that's harder for people to understand. And his concept of CPTSD and the way he advocates it really taught me to respect childhood trauma. Before that, I was much more of the more commonly accepted manosphere opinion, I think, where it's kind of like a walk it off, brush it off, quit being a pussy, it's not a big deal, get over it, all this stuff. And I used to more or less believe that. I grew up, and I think that actually does work for men in some specific instances, like contact football. You get hurt, you get your bell rung, your head's ringing. If you didn't get a concussion, hopefully, you walk it off. You be patient, and you wait 5-10 minutes, and the pain goes away, and you get back in the game. But emotionally, I think men get crippled with that kind of attitude, and they don't realize it because it's the bravado element. It's like this, like, yeah, just walk it off, man. Being a pussy, she hurt you, so what? She cheated, so what? It's like, well, that happened repeatedly over a long period of time. And these things are like knives that stick in your heart or something, right?
Yeah. And that stoicism, let's call it stoicism. That's not the right term for it, but I don't know of a better one because
stoicism in excess, maybe in excess.
Yeah. And so when going back to the APA, when they talk about stoicism, they talk about it as always being something that men, it's a shortcoming in men. And they're not seeing that it's two-sided. They're not seeing that, it can be a shortcoming, but it can also be a huge strength, and everybody needs to have some. Women need to have some stoicism too. It tends to be more of a male quality, but it's something that everybody needs to possess in some measure. But you need to be able to recognize when you're not making your own decision, when that emotional side of your mind has stepped in and it's sounding the alarm, when it thinks that something's going on that isn't going on at the moment.
Yep, that was a big awakening for me with Richard's work. That I have these emotional flashbacks or basically old behavior patterns that were built and were useful to survive. Like I needed them as a tool or a weapon, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And at this point in my life, I might still need them, but only in very specific instances where they're used on purpose, like in business or some other social thing I'm doing, like make women great again. To do this, I had to go against a mob of feminists and SJWs and news outlets that wanted to silence me. They wanted me to shut up on my own, or they wanted to cancel me. And my ability to switch off their voices and their social pressure is a tool that I developed in my youth. But you can take it too far, I find, in relationships and dating and stuff, and then it'll blow up relationships. It'll self-detonate. I'll step on my own foot. We'll say, keep it polite. But it's taken 30 years or till 30 years of age, 31, to figure this stuff out. And without guys like you and Richard, like I wouldn't have figured that out. I would have kept in that behavior pattern much longer in life, I think.
Well, and using a survival strategy like that to the excess, that's exactly what your mind, in some ways of thinking about it, that's what your mind is supposed to do. And your job is to supervise your mind and make sure that it's not in charge. But your mind is supposed to say, okay, this worked. Let me do that forever and ever in every situation, because that emotional side of your mind uses very blunt tools.
Yeah, in your book, actually, The User's Guide to the Human Mind, I think there's a whole chapter dedicated saying that happiness is not the purpose of your mind. I'm assuming survival and reproduction are much more the purpose of what your mind wants. Happiness is your job.
Yeah, your mind doesn't care if you're happy.
Yeah.
Your mind just doesn't want you to get run over by a bus or another narcissist or whatever it was.
Or eaten or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's get to your book more in a second here before we move off CPTSD. Now, PTSD, anyone who looks into the history of it, Wikipedia articles and stuff, they'll see that PTSD used to be basically ignored. It wasn't taken seriously. And there's a whole history of how it was described. There was like shell shock was one of the names for it before it became formalized, and a couple other ones like that. But eventually it was called PTSD, and eventually it was accepted into mainstream psychology as a legitimate diagnosis for people, especially war veterans and stuff.
Yeah.
Do you think that CPTSD will follow that same track over the coming years and decades till it's accepted?
I kind of think it will, and I hope it will, because I don't know anything about prevalence rates, but just from personal observation, I think it's more prevalent than PTSD. So a person can get into a car accident and have PTSD, and that certainly happens. But I mean, it happens a lot, that sort of thing. But it happens a lot also that people have this scattershot approach, like you described, to where the anxious reaction builds over time through several incidents.
Yeah. So I was pouring some water there. So let's get more into your book. So your book is actually, I think it's in a lot of ways related to, and to me it makes sense anyway. It's very consistent with CPTSD. So you're talking about, I mean, the subtitle of the book is Why Our Brains Make Us Unhappy, Anxious, and Neurotic, and What We Can Do About It. And for me, the way I interpret that from your work and from following Richard's work and a few others like Alice Miller, a Swiss psychologist who died about 10 years ago now. I love her work too, though. Basically, negative emotions are actually very useful, and they're not always bad, even if we consider them, and maybe accurately so, negative. Like they're instructive and they're useful. Yeah. And this is something that I did not understand in my 20s, and I don't even think the manosphere really, points out too often, other than a few exceptions, like trust your gut. With a woman, if you're seeing red flags and your gut says get away, you need to listen to your gut, get away. But outside of like gut feelings, quote unquote, it's like depression is seen as bad, anxiety is seen as bad, all these things. But your book, I think, is describing that they're really not. It's your brain telling you something. You need to listen to it. Is that accurate? An accurate take on your work? And can you expand on that?
Yeah, that's an accurate take. And I wrote that book or published it in 2011, which means I wrote it before then. So it's a decade old now, which is kind of weird to think about. And that's about the last time I looked at it. But yeah, the reason I wrote the book was because there's all this, I had been in practice for several years, and I started my practice focusing on anxiety disorders. And I had some reasons for focusing on anxiety disorders. One of those reasons is that you can have a lot of success working with anxiety disorders because people tend to be very motivated, and there's some great research and technology out there for dealing with it. And so it just seemed like a great way to get out of the gate with a lot of successes. And so a few years into my practice, I started to notice, well, I actually noticed this fairly early on, that this literature that's out there is great. There's a whole body of behavioral literature that talks about anxiety disorders, but it wasn't written for guys like me. Like if you'd given me any of that literature when I was in my 20s, it just wouldn't have registered. And so I wanted to write a book that was a book I would have been able to read when I was 20. When I didn't have much language about emotion, I didn't have much language about how the brain works, and write a book that doesn't pathologize what your mind is doing, because that's what a lot of this literature really leads to. That
is really key. You undo the pathologizing of depression and anxiety. There's not many people. I didn't feel there was many people in my 20s that did that. If I looked into depression or anxiety, you wouldn't. If you look around on Google real quick, searching for these diseases and these symptoms, you don't get like actually depression can be useful and you should listen to it and change your life or take action from it.
Yeah, it's starting. That message is starting to get a little bit of traction, but you have to look
Yeah.
for it. It's not the first thing that pops up on Google.
Yeah. So if I'm feeling anxious or depressed and maybe even suspect clinical depression, why is that useful? And what should I do as a young man? Because I'm sure there's guys watching that have felt that way before.
Yeah.
And what should they do, and who should they? Maybe not. I don't need to. I don't know if you can recommend they go see a psychologist or not, but what should they look for, and like what should they to get better and to make their life better without just pathologizing depression and beating themselves up over it? Because that's the thing I find too is you get like Richard talks about, you get into this cycle of I feel depressed. Wow, I feel shitty for being depressed. It's like this. It's like a depressionception. You just get into this multi-layered insanity of not insanity, but it just keeps going like a rabbit hole of depression and anxiety and stuff. So what should the guys do if they feel that way?
Well, if you're in your
Start.
early 20s and if you're a young guy and you're facing this depression, I think the first thing to know is that a lot of young guys feel depressed because being a young guy kind of sucks, because you're supposed to have your act together, but you don't know what you're doing, and you're at your lowest value to women, and being a 20-year-old dude kind of sucks in a lot of ways, and so it's kind of a depressing time. But if it feels like it's beyond what should be normal, and it's if that depression isn't motivating you to go out and do something, which depression is kind of weird because it's there to solve a problem, but it's also very demotivating, and so
yeah. It's slippery. It's hard to get out of.
It is really slippery. That's a good word for it. And so I would say go see a psychologist and get assessed for it, because it's not always a useful emotion. Sometimes there's something going on that's more on the physical side. Sometimes I would say that's not the majority of times. Usually there's something that you're trying to solve and you're just not solving it effectively because you don't know how to do it yet. It's not a shaming thing that you don't know how to do. You just don't know how to do it yet.
But it can have biological origins, you're saying too.
Yeah, and the more you live in that state, the more your brain sort of adjusts to that state. And if you practice playing the piano for a really long time, you're going to get good at playing the piano. If you practice certain kinds of thoughts that are depressing and demotivating, you're going to get very good at doing those thoughts over and over. So, yeah, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think, so let me give you a more succinct answer. If you're depressed, define the problem. Like, where is this coming from? Is this coming from some problem that I need to solve, or is everything really going pretty well and there's clearly something else going on with me? In which case maybe you need to go the psychiatric route and possibly look at some medications. I think one of the problems with our medical systems with depression is that you go to your primary care physician and you say I'm depressed, and that primary care physician doesn't have much training in mental health, and so their first response is, well, I have a pill that can make that go away, and the pill can sometimes make things a lot worse, and so the pill needs to be the last option rather than the first option. The first option needs to be like, you just get your baselines in order, your sleep, your diet, your exercise, like let's get things moving, and that alone will sometimes cure a lot of low-level depression. And then from there you start looking at different behavioral interventions, and then eventually you might get to, you need some help here medically.
Yeah, that seems pretty reasonable. No wonder you're in a minority of your field and
I think most psychologists
sometimes.
would say the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah, most physicians, I don't know that they would argue with it necessarily. It's just like they don't get much training in mental health.
It's just their first response, like a knee-jerk response to it. Like take a pill, go do this instead.
They spend 10 years learning. You find a problem, you have this medical intervention for it. So why should mental health be any different from that point of view?
Yeah. I like your take too, though, that brain, like you're saying, there can be problems from it. I've read about that with serotonin and things like that, from specifically antidepressants that can like train these things, and then you're stuck to it. And if if you get off of it, it can cause problems.
Yeah, and the research out there is kind of unreliable because everybody who does any research on antidepressants has an agenda. Clearly, the drug companies have an agenda, and then you have people on the academic side that have an agenda against those medications. So you have to be kind of careful how you read it. But some of the research I find pretty compelling is that when you take an SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, you're messing with the serotonin system in your brain, and you can downregulate those neurons, meaning that they stop producing as much because there's an abundance in between nerve cells that's just hanging out of this chemical, and so your brain stops producing as much. And once you get to the point where you've downregulated to a certain period of time, it can be very difficult to get back to the baseline on your own. And
Yeah.
so
It sounds a lot like steroids that are being abused. Your testicles will shrink because they're not needed because you have so much testosterone flowing through your blood.
it's a good analogy.
Your body's just, it's not surprising, I guess, that what you're saying, because it's like, what do you expect the body to do? It always wants to conserve and to, maintain homeostasis and stuff, not expend extra energy and resources on stuff it doesn't need. So,
yeah,
it's
so if you've
way
got
too logical.
an abundance of something, you stop producing it.
Yeah. I like too, by the way. So I interviewed Dr. Warren Farrell recently. Warren Farrell, who author of The Boy Crisis, and in his book with his co-author, they talked about ADHD, and they did take a position that ADHD is not overdiagnosed, but it is overprescribed and overmedicated. And that was kind of an interesting take on it, because sometimes you'll see people swing to like mainstream, just give pills, pop pills to all these little kids, which I think is really bad. But then also you have people that go completely like never take any of the stuff, never take, and it's the extreme. It's like vaccination stuff. It's like you have people who are like, never take it, we're all gonna die. It's all mark of the beast. And then you have people who are like, everyone needs a mandatory vaccination. Bend over and take the shot up your ass, or you're killing grandma.
Right.
So it's like these swings. Yeah. Who would have thought? Yeah. A continuum, a spectrum. Yeah. Let's go into more of the manosphere. You were hitting that a little bit. So you did a video not too long ago on your channel. Where is it? Boom. 5 months ago now. Wow, time flies. Holy shit. Yes, this year is crazy. But you did a big video on hypergamy and kind of it was your critique on the, pretty long too, 42 minutes, pretty longer. And this seemed to be a critique of the manosphere's use of the term hypergamy, which is distinct from its sociological origins from like the 80s or the 90s or whatever. Can you talk to me about the basis of this video that got a lot of traction? I know it was talked about on Twitter a lot and on YouTube and stuff.
Yeah. Well, I made that video because I get asked this question. I was getting asked this question so often. And so two things I need to do. Number one, I was never comfortable asking the question, what do you think about hypergamy? Because it's such a big question. You can go 20 different directions with that question. So I was never comfortable answering that question because I hadn't done my research on it from, there's two forks in the road here, so to speak. There's the whatever I could find in academia in the professional literature about hypergamy versus what's out there in the manosphere and in forums and on Reddit and so forth about hypergamy. So that was question number one, is I felt like I needed to have some kind of coherent answer. And then the other thing I was trying to accomplish there is I never wanted to talk about it again, because I felt like I wanted to just like put something out there so that when somebody asked me, I could just say, okay, well, here's 42 minutes if you have 42 minutes to kill. And so, I broke down what hypergamy is from that academic stance and from the ideological red pill. And I used the term red pill hypergamy theory because it seems that there's this whole framework that has grown up around this idea of hypergamy and
kind of organically, I think.
Yeah. And I don't think it was, as far as I could tell, it wasn't one person who came up with it. I think there are individuals who would like to lay claim to the term because they've done a lot of work on it. And that's fine. I think if you've done a ton of work on something, then you should be able to lay some claim to the term. But I think it was a crowdsourced idea. Yeah. And my basic take on it is that, yes, hypergamy is real in the sense that women tend to want to date across and up social hierarchies. And in fact, that's a phrase that Jordan Peterson used. Women date across and up dominance hierarchies is what he said. And I don't know how you would argue against that. It's so patently obvious that you'd be silly to try to argue against that, just like you'd be silly to argue that a man doesn't want to get the most physically attractive woman he could find. I mean, why would he not? So we'll take that as a given, because that's a natural thing. And so if you're going to tell me that this natural thing doesn't exist, then I'm going to say, well, you're going to have to demonstrate that it doesn't exist. It's such a basic fact. But then the manosphere takes this simple idea and they start injecting things like ovulatory shift theory, which has been completely discredited. You can go look it up. Anybody who wants it.
Sounds like treason in the manosphere, Mr. Shawn Smith.
Well,
there you what do they call it? You heathen, you heretic. Yeah.
There's been a lot of studies lately by very respectable people, like I'm not going to say names because I think I'm going to screw it up if I do, but very respectable researchers have come out and say, there's really not much here.
Okay.
And so you add that into hypergamy, and then you find some, I don't know, some sea turtles with sperm competition or whatever kind of obscure thing that you can inject into this.
Oh, there's one with
Like,
flies. They have. Did you see that about a year or two ago?
no,
It's
no.
basically, and so manosphere guys, and May we'll see what happens, but they're worried that in flies they found in some scientific study, and it was supposed to be pretty legit, that basically flies, when a female fly or whatever is inseminated by a male fly, and then another one, small elements of the DNA of the sperm and the male fly, they basically get stuck in her
Hmm.
brain,
Okay.
and as she keeps reproducing with these male
Hmm.
flies, and the concern is everyone's like, holy shit, does this happen in women? Are women who being inseminated? I mean, it's
Right.
plausible, I guess, but there's no proof of it yet. But basically,
Yeah.
it would have a lot of correlation though to women that as we say, and is pretty clear in statistics that women, as they gain partner counts, they lose the ability to pair bond and they lose the ability to be happy in a marriage.
Right.
Stefan Molyneux and many others have shown huge graphs on this, and as they rack up a count, not just one but 5, 10, 20, their ability to be happy and be in a relationship just falls off a cliff. And so
Yeah.
the worry though is that we're like when humans are like flies, and that they're getting male DNA stuck in their brain. Um,
Yeah, I've seen those studies, and I find them compelling that women, when they, well, people in general, I'd say this is true for men too, to some degree, to a lesser degree though, that
yeah,
when people really start tinkering with their ability to bond with other people, they're going to have difficulty bonding with other people, and I don't think it's because you get sperm stuck in your medulla oblongata or whatever, but getting back to this idea of hypergamy,
Waterboy reference.
yes, your medulla oblongata, yeah. So getting back to hypergamy, my basic conclusion was that conceptually, this red pill hypergamy theory is just a mess. Like I know, and I'm sorry, I know there are guys out there who think this is dissertation level stuff, but you could only think that if you've never seen a dissertation. It's just a mess. But that doesn't mean that there aren't some good lessons that come out of it. And I think that's really where the value is. And one of the primary lessons is that, like this message that you're good enough the way you are as a man. Just show her who you are, and she'll fall in love with you, and all that kind of sappy romantic stuff that we get inundated with. It doesn't apply. That you need to be out there earning it every day. And so if this theoretical framework of red pill hypergamy theory helps you remember that you need to be getting after it every day, okay, fine. I got no problem with it.
Okay.
So.
Before we move off this topic, no, I love it, man. I mean, your head's gonna up on a pike if you keep saying this stuff in the manosphere. But
Well,
I got your back. I think it's great.
I think I've
speak
already
up.
been excommunicated. That's okay.
Oh my god. Yeah, maybe you can catch the rocket with Elon Musk. Like you were talking about on Twitter. I was laughing at that when you tweeted that.
Yeah.
Can I catch the next rocket off this planet?
Yeah.
We do have a question from the audience I want to take in a second. Someone wrote it, but I did want to ask as well. Are there any other big manosphere popular wisdoms that you're critical of? For example, there's a pretty popular saying. I'm sure you're familiar with it. She's not yours. It's just your turn. She's not really, yours and all that. Just your turn. I see guys. Maybe there's some merit to this on some level, but I see guys saying that who've been in relationships for like 5, 10, 20 plus years.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, that's a long turn. Like, assuming she hasn't cheated on you, like your turn is like multiple decades.
Right.
And so it's just very strange to see these kind of sayings pop up.
Well,
And you'll see guys criticize it. They're like Cobra Tate, who's Mr. Alpha bad boy, 10 million. And he's like, yeah, it's stupid. Let's what losers say and blah, blah, blah. So do you have any more manosphere popular wisdoms that you like to criticize or you have beef with?
Well, yeah, I can name a couple of things, but I want to say first of all, I'm very thankful that it exists, because
The
even if
community.
it's not, the community. I'm
Yeah.
really pleased that the red pill community is out there,
Yeah.
because even if it's an imperfect framework, it's a framework, and it's a
Yeah.
place to start. And so many guys are coming into relationships with no framework, or with a framework that is really counterproductive, and it's going to get them hurt.
Yeah.
So thank God that the red pill community exists. That said, yeah, there's a couple of things. Number one, a friend of mine says that the red pill community has resting bitch face. Like, it's just a grumpy place. It's and I think part of the reason it's grumpy is because you have a lot of guys that they're a little bit traumatized and they haven't dealt with it. Maybe I'm not here to diagnose anybody because I don't know what's going on in anyone's particular life, but they tend to lose sight of the fact that yes, women can be opportunistic and they can be hypergamous, to use that word, well, they are hypergamous in the traditional sense, classical sense, but they can be hypergamous in the more red pill cynical sense. But they can also be tremendously devoted and nurturing, and I think that's the part that gets lost in the red pill community.
Okay. Yeah. Man, yeah, you made a good point though. God, thank God that the whole red pill community exists.
Yes.
I do agree with the grumpy aspects and things like that. That was not when I found the red pill community in 2016. That was not lost on me, and I was already familiar with other elements of the manosphere too. But overall, I think it's very positive still. Even in its most negative elements, it's still like it's men who want to get better, and there's a big self-improvement focus that I think is very genuine, and it's men who want to help each other for free, for paid. I mean, you have all kinds of since day one in the 90s with the manosphere, it's always been this dualistic focus with people, doing stuff for free, out of the goodness of their heart or whatever, and wanting to give back. And then also people charging, but a lot of it being very good. Some of it's crap, of course, like any industry.
Of course.
But a lot of it's a very positive place.
Yeah, and the red pill community is doing something that my profession can't seem to wrap its head around, which is talking to men about relationships in a way that's accurate and useful and helpful, because what you get from my profession is a very feminized view of relationships and a very feminized view of what you as a man are supposed to do. And it's sometimes useful, sometimes extremely counterproductive. So the red pill community is an antidote to my profession, and thank God for that.
Yeah. Good stuff. Let's get some more. Here's a question from a viewer we can pop on here from AM. Dr. Shawn, be kind as to oblige my humble request. Is it normal after desisting from long-term substance abuse for your subconscious to at times produce very negative, overwhelming memories? I guess he's referring to emotional flashbacks almost here.
Yeah. And without knowing more about the situation, I would say absolutely yes. And I would say that a lot of times the purpose of substance abuse is to try to control internal experience. You're trying to get away from that depression, that anxiety, those memories, whatever it is. That's how a lot of people use a lot of substances. And so
trying to numb pain, basically.
Numb pain. Get away from memories and feelings. And so when you take that away, what's going to show up? Well, memories and feelings.
Okay. Oh, here he is. Thanks for answering my plea for help. You understand what I'm experiencing. Mr. Anthony, you're a blessing of manhood. Dr. Shawn, thank you for your expertise. God bless you, gentlemen. Thanks.
That's what my wife said about me. I'm a blessing of manhood. So,
yeah.
But so let me just say, if you're a guy dealing with substance abuse, community is the best thing for you. Get out there and get some accountability with other guys. AA is great for that, but AA is not for everybody. Alcoholics Anonymous, and it doesn't click for everybody, but go out there and get some kind of community in your corner.
Yeah. I've heard I do agree with the community element. I've heard a lot of negative things about AA too, though, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's great for some people. It's not a good fit for others.
Yeah. Let's shift gears a little bit. I've flipped over my paper of unlimited questions I have for you.
Yeah.
What is your take on the state of, I call it gender relations in America today? However you want to approach that question, because we hear a lot about race relations in the news and stuff, obviously lately with, the riots and all that. But more generally, America is about 50-50, male-female, like most countries. Mm-hmm. What is your take on that and where it's gone in your lifetime? You're quite a bit older than me. In your 40s. I'm 31 now. You've seen a lot. Oh, in your 50s? No shit.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Good. All right, good for you, man. Looking young, dude. But what is your take on the state of gender relations? I mean, you've seen in just recent years, of course, we've seen Me Too and all that. We've seen the rise of feminism, the rise of cancel culture, which I think is heavily associated with feminism, and as well as the feminine side that you're talking about. So, gender relations in America. Where is it now? Where was it when you were younger? And where do you think it can go? Where should it go?
Where I think it is right now is that most people, whatever that means, the vast majority of men and women just want to get along with each other. But you've got these loudmouths that are just out there stirring the pot and trying to shut people down and just being miserable scolds. And for whatever reason, we've given them the stage right now. And I don't think it's going to last forever. I think there are some really good people out there fighting against this. But I think we will always come back to an equilibrium between men and women, because that's how we function best together historically, and that's how we're going to function best together going forward.
Yeah. One of the things I thought about earlier in the show, but I didn't get a chance to voice it as of yet, but you mentioned them, we talked about the manosphere focusing too much on, looking for negative horror stories, which on Reddit, there's a whole bunch of them outside the manosphere too. You can go to there's dead bedroom communities with hundreds of thousands of people in it. There's all kinds of really screwed up communities on Reddit. Way beyond. They make the red pill look like a really happy unicorn place, like
Right.
like a teddy bear land. But
Yeah.
what comes to mind though when you're talking about this, they focus on the horror stories. So many marriages in America fail. I think not even just ending in divorce, but they fail even if they don't end up in divorce. They fail just like in this lifelong drudgery, like a zombie relationship. So I think the failure rate for marriages is pretty high. It's above even the divorce rate. But some marriages and relationships work. They not only work, they work really, really well. Not just in a functional way. Like people are really happy and committed to them. You seem to be an example of that. I know there's plenty of other speakers like Tanner Guzy and Hunter Drew and stuff that we know who are in awesome, what appear to be, and as far as I know, are really awesome relationships.
Yeah.
And that seems to get a very low volume in the manosphere. It gets thrown out as unicorn this and whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, it just comes to mind with the gender relations. It's some relationships work and they work really, really well.
Yes. If you come in, you know yourself, you know what you're doing, you know how to vet and choose wisely. Yeah, it can work very well.
Yeah,
But
I even see it. It almost feels like there's a pathologizing of it, though. Like we call that, like if like the manosphere sees some, especially the red pill community, they see a functioning, healthy, long-term marriage or relationship. They're like blue pill dream, blah blah blah. It's like,
Yeah.
what's wrong with trying to build a family? Like that's blue pill. That's bad. Like what?
Yeah. And I don't know where that comes from on any individual basis to try to crap on someone else's success, but
Yeah,
I think a lot of that is just, if I had to generalize, I would say it's guys who are worried that someone else is going to get burned in marriage, and so they're saying, "Don't do this."
yeah,
That this is an outlier. Don't try for this because it can happen for you.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Crabs in a bucket almost is what it feels like.
a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's move on to talk to me about your bright triad that you discussed in the Tactical Guide to Women. That was the first time I'd ever seen that concept, and that's opposing it. That's a play on words from the dark triad, which is not a personality disorder, but it is a personality, a cluster of personality traits. I believe is how it's described.
Yeah.
The dark triad is what Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and narcissism.
Yes. As I
And so
remember. Yeah.
your bright triad is clarity, maturity, and stability. You sound like George Bruno. Maybe that's where he got it from.
Maybe so.
Talk to me about the bright triad, though, and isn't that just some blue pill dream? This is all that's unicorn hunting. Why are you unicorn hunting, Shawn? Why are you teaching young guys? They're gonna get burned, man.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a hack, I guess. But the reason I came up with this concept is as I was writing this book, the reason I wrote the Tactical Guide to Women is because as I was working with couples, I was noticing these mistakes. Couples were coming in which the guys had made the same mistakes. Different guys had made the same mistakes over and over and over again. I was seeing this very clear pattern of mistakes that men make because they're not being selective about women. And so I started going through the literature and through my old files and looking at, okay, what is the bare minimum basic qualities that a female human being needs to possess to be successful in a relationship. And so I came up with clarity of intent, emotional maturity, and stability. And that's all it is. It's just a bare minimum. Like here's your low bar. Here's what she needs to have if she's going to succeed at all in any kind of interpersonal relationship for a long period of time. And it's a pretty low bar. But guys are not taught that, hey, you can be selective about women. Like you can have standards. And so here's a very basic standard you can have.
Yeah. I don't know. I think low bar is a bit over aggressive on characterizing it. I would say it's its fundamentals you're teaching guys to focus on.
Yeah, that might be a better. Yeah, I think that is a better word. It's a fundamental.
Yeah. You're too harsh on yourself, man. I think it's some fundamentals.
Yeah,
it's good starting points.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which are becoming hard to find. I feel it's funny because I feel that the clarity and the maturity and stability. I mean, I agree with you 1,000,000%. Like if I'm going to be in a relationship with a woman, I definitely want these. These seem really important, especially if I want her to be the mother of my children someday. Like I don't want a lack of these for my children as a parent. That's really, really bad.
Right. But emotional maturity, take that one, for example. How many of us had fathers who sat us down or went on a walk with us or whatever and said, hey, here's some basic emotional skills that a woman should have so that you don't end up at 3 in the morning having some stupid argument that's been going on for a week.
Yeah, I know these, man. I've seen, even outside of a relationship, I've seen some of this stuff.
Yeah.
I feel though, and I've talked to a lot of my friends that are my age, even younger, and we feel even from 2010, approaching women, picking women up to now 2020, there's been this massive shift in behavior in America that I don't see. And it's like well, some of the negative things, the lack of these is what you see. You see it feels like, and so we're concerned with bias. Legitimately, like, are we just biased? Are we the ones with the issue here? Or is it like it feels like the population of women that have these qualities are decreasing? And now one of the ways I've seen it put that really good is from AJ Cortez, the guy we know from the convention, a speaker, and he was in his speech in Poland last year at the 21 convention. He's basically saying there's always been a bell curve, so to speak, of female behavior, probably male behavior too, right? But you have these good girls, and you have these really bad girls. I mean, they say prostitution is the oldest career in history, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have the people in the middle. You have the middle, 60, 80% of women that are just like the average woman, and there's still a spectrum though, right? What AJ Cortez is proposing is that due maybe to feminism and all the other cultural forces we've seen in the past couple of decades, maybe even technology like birth control, we've seen bad behavior shift from being the bottom minority of the population to filtering into the bell curve, like the middle population. And that feels like it's picked up a lot of steam in the past 10, 15 years. And I started picking up girls and approaching women at bars and stuff and in college about 15 years ago, 2006, 2005, 2006. And so I feel like these things are disappearing in America and the West, and it just sucks as a young man
what
trying
do
to
you
find.
What's going on if the female population is changing, what's causing that?
I think feminism is picking up steam. I think maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it'll burn itself out. Maybe there'll be consequences. Like they say politically that tyranny sows the seeds of its own destruction. So maybe we're seeing that with feminism. Maybe the ramping up of feminism. Maybe the Me Too. And I think the witch hunt and the craziness of a couple of years ago still occurring now to a degree. Maybe that amping up. I think that's an example of this. I mean, the number of young, I don't even know how I want to. I have concerns about voicing this on air. It feels like, for example, in the 90s, and when I grew up as a kid, we heard the campaign in school, even in elementary school and then in middle school and high school, no means no, no means no, no means no. Mm-hmm. It was very clear and easy to understand. And then, of course, in California, they tried changing laws. And more recently, it's like yes means yes. And all these and yes means whatever. So that's an example of it as well, like an attitude shift of basic definitions and basic relationships between men and women, like the standards of rape and assault and stuff. No means no is a very clear thing that people could understand. And now it's this hazy mixture of Me Too and allegations and this basically rape hysteria. Like this is like the Salem witch trials of men today, it feels like. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but it just feels like shit's running off the rails, to be honest, with young women.
Well, yeah, ideologically, it certainly is on campuses. I got to the point a long time ago where my advice to young men is do not date women on campuses. Like there's nothing there that you can't get somewhere else. So you're there to do a job, do your job, get in, get out, treat your classmates like you would treat a coworker. They're off limits, but that may be a little bit overly cautious. But to your point, clearly there's some ideological influences. And it sounds like you're also saying that maturity, the basics, maturity, stability, that kind of stuff, you're seeing less of that in younger women?
Yes. And I asked you, I think a long time ago in the Red Man group, maybe a year or two ago when we were early episodes, like it feels in a way like what you would see in books from the 2000s and even the 90s on cluster B disorders. You're seeing behavior that would be considered like a personality disorder maybe, or symptom of it. You're seeing that in everyday women. It's like social media and modern feminism and modern culture has been normalizing what even 20 years ago would have been considered like a symptom of a personality disorder, like really bad stuff. I mean, look at Instagram. Instagram is filled with women. Instagram, the average woman today in America, young woman, treats herself in a way like a softcore porn model from the 90s. Like her Instagram is filled with pictures of her boobs and her butt. And I like boobs and butt on women, but I don't think women should be posting this stuff in public 24/7. And then they're like in this World of Warcraft style addiction with like leveling up their Instagram account. I don't know if I'm running off the rails with this, but yeah, maybe technology's played a role. Birth control, the internet, social media is really kind of still new too. But yeah, you're seeing, very bad behavior becoming normalized. And it's specific to America though. Like when I went to Poland last year, you didn't see this. Women there would brag that they don't use Instagram, that they don't even have an account half the time. So it seems to be unique to America and the West as well, where feminism is more dominant and stuff.
Well, so since everything sort of cycles back and forth, I wonder if you'll see that in America, where you start seeing American women bragging that they don't have an Instagram account. And I'm sure there are some now, but
yeah,
I don't know.
I don't know any women, but I know a couple men that do my age
that brag that they don't have Instagram.
Yeah, the girls will ask them, and they legit. If they're not even lying, like hiding it, they just don't. They don't have social media, and it makes you stand out. Like today,
Yeah,
if you
imagine
don't have Facebook or Instagram and stuff, you're just an oddity. Like, why don't you have that? What's wrong with you? Why are you not? Come on, sheep, open up your Instagram account.
Yeah, I guess
So
some people
I
do
would
other
love
things.
to. Yeah. How dare they? But
Yeah,
is that still hold true? I mean, is that something you've seen maybe in popular culture, that you're seeing what would be considered, not too long ago, symptoms of a personality disorder being portrayed by the average woman, not even considering the men yet, but just women doing this stuff,
I
posting
see
pictures of their
it.
ass and stuff all day on the internet.
Yeah. Well, I don't have Instagram, so I don't spend any time
Uh,
on there. So I don't, I can't speak about what's going on there. I do see that personality, that disordered personality conflict showing up in ideologies like feminism.
hmm.
I think feminism has a lot of the characteristics of borderline personality disorder. It's on a larger scale. You can't
Wow.
win. You can't win with feminists. You're walking on eggshells because you don't want to
Yep.
say the wrong thing. They're just digging up the past, stirring up conflict. It has a very borderline feel to it. But as far as
Yeah.
that filtering down to individual women, I guess if an individual woman buys into the ideology, she's going to buy into a little bit of that dynamic. But I also see the other side because I meet a lot of millennial women and younger women that, to me, I mean, I'm not discounting what you're saying because I think it's absolutely true. But I also see this other side where I see younger women that really seem to have their act together. Like I have a family member, really great guy. He got married this weekend, and she's wonderful. Like she's not on Instagram. She's just a wonderful woman. Like she checks all the boxes, and she's great. And so I see women like that are still out there, and so I don't lose hope.
Okay. Yeah, I've been we can get into this as well, but with the Make Women Great Again campaign that I started earlier this year for the upcoming convention for it and all that and stuff. And then it seems to have its own life on the internet, just as the fact that the convention even exists seems to have spawned its own media outrage to the nines. I mean, it reached over 100 million people. But because of that, I would actually say that the number of women who follow me that have their shit together, that are much more in favor of very positive approach to femininity.
Mm-hmm.
They don't hate men. They're annoyed and they're aggravated with women who do hate men,
Yeah.
openly or covertly or any combination of the two. But these are like legitimately good women who some of them have YouTube channels, they have podcasts and stuff they run. Some of them are just individual women. But I've attracted a lot more of them as followers very consistently. They're cheering us on, me and all the speakers and stuff for it. So yeah, there are definitely still women who have their shit together, but I think it's a pretty tiny minority today. Unfortunately, kind of sucks.
Well, that does suck if that's true, and
If it's true, yeah.
yeah. Well, and if that's your experience, then I believe you because you're out there and you've got your finger on the pulse. I'm just an old dude sitting in an office, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm concerned though that I just keep picking up women off Bumble and Tinder and bars and stuff. So it's a very specific population. So I'm still skeptical to a degree. I'm like, well, like Goldman Unleashed, another speaker that we know, he did a tour throughout America last year, and pretty driving around Florida, all over the East Coast, Middle America, Arizona and stuff, I think. And he had a much more positive experience traveling through rural towns, meeting people, meeting women and stuff. And that gives me hope that there's still like a lot of people outside of cities that are much more, including women, are much more level-headed and not into this whole social media, post pictures of my ass all day lifestyle.
Right. So, what would be your best advice for a younger guy that's trying to meet a woman who's a little more grounded?
Leave the cities that's what I'm doing next. I'm going to go to South Dakota and go see Mount Rushmore, and their governor's beautiful. I was amazed. I was like, wow, it's like the hottest governor ever.
I don't know of her.
Take a look. Yeah, just South Dakota governor.
Okay.
That was for a I was like, that's how the governor looks. I want to see how the woman my age look.
Yeah, our governor's a dumpy looking ugly dude. We got
Yeah.
ripped off.
No, this chick's pretty good looking. Yeah, totally.
Okay.
I'm
So you're gonna
slightly
leave the city and see what's out there.
Yeah. Now I've tried that in Florida a bit. I've tried going meeting women out more like at the beach towns and stuff where Tony Bruno lives, George Bruno's brother. And honestly, I think it's just Florida. Florida's just filled with crazy men and women. Like there's a whole meme for it, the Florida man, the Florida woman. There's a whole subreddit for it. It's hysterical. It seems to be unique to Florida. And I'm one to talk.
Well,
I mean, people immediately accused me of being a Florida man when I did this thing.
yeah, well there is that old meme that goes around with the rest of the country. And you see a bizarre headline. Guess what state it's from?
Yep,
Yeah.
Exactly. But
I
I
don't
want
know
to.
if that's fair. That's probably not fair.
It's probably not fair. I like joking with it though. I know that I even did a whole tweet thread about it a couple months ago, just talking about the Florida people. We have different classes of Florida people. Actually, it's not all one unified, homogenized thing.
I love Florida because there's such a fascinating mix of people there.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and wildlife and the state itself, it's all very unique. The whole state's surrounded by water almost. It's a peninsula.
Yeah,
but yeah, you got the Key West people though. The Key West conks, they seceded from the Union back in like the 80s, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the Conch Republic. Yeah, the mayor and the city council, they seceded for like a day.
Okay.
And then they surrendered. But they're real crazy in Key West. And then you got the beach people on the East Coast. You got the Central Florida people. You got all kinds of the Miami people. The Cubans and Hispanic communities. So Florida is a wild place. But I found the beach girls though to be pretty crazy as well. And a lot of them actually, I mean that sounds harsh, but a lot of them come to Orlando too. They drive in. It's about an hour, not even. They come to the bars here, and like anytime I know they're from Cocoa Beach or any of these Melbourne Beach and stuff out there, I'm like, well, there's a lot of drugs out there, for example, and it's specific to the beach towns. I don't know why. They're small towns, but like really serious. There's like really high murder rates in Cocoa Beach, believe it or not. It's like one of the murder capitals of America.
Really?
Yeah, it's pretty wild. You would never guess that. It's like the Ron John Surf Shop, Beach Town, Cocoa Beach, and there's like a ton of drugs and stuff and murder and violent crimes.
All right, so not the ideal place to meet your average woman.
No, it was not the rural America that Goldman was referring to.
Right.
But I'm going to check out more of rural America is what I want to do and see where that takes me. And then also I want to keep going to Eastern Europe, which I really enjoyed Poland last year. A lot of it, the culture, the history, the country, even getting to know meeting the men there and stuff. But the women especially, I was blown away with, especially if they were from Poland, but also the ones that were visiting from Ukraine, other countries. They were so feminine. They were so positive. They were much more cheerful. None of this resting bitch face stuff. There was no confusion about being a woman or being a man. It felt like they were acting like women, as I would think of women, and they were you felt like they expected you to act like a man. Like if you open a door for a girl there, I don't think they're gonna like jump down your throat and accuse you of toxic masculinity or treat you like you're some beta schmuck. It feels like 1950s America, I think, but with cell phones and stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed that. And they're really smart too and like educated, and they speak like in America, women obsess over, Disney Plus and reality TV. In Poland, they speak like 3 languages fluently, and they talk to you about like classical art and like music and stuff. It's an absolute, and they're beautiful and hot and fit, and they dress well, and none of them are fat. There's no fat people in Poland, no fat women, no fat men, unless you're tourists. It's amazing. Like, so for me, it was like heaven, and that I want to explore more of and see where that takes me as well.
Yeah, well, I'll be curious to hear what you think about rural America. And I had a similar experience when I spent 10 weeks in Sarajevo, and I was warned before I got there that it's going to look like a fashion show. You need to up your game a little bit.
Where's Sarajevo? What state?
It's in Bosnia, the old
Bosnia.
Yugoslavia. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And it was,
my grandma's from Croatia and all that out there.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful country. A lot of history there. It's not all good. But
yeah, I know.
I guess that's every place. But yeah, I was warned that the women there are going to be walking down the street like they're in the fashion show, and they were. And it's just sort of a different, even back then, there's just sort of a different mentality about things. But yeah, I'll be curious to know how rural America compares to Tinder. So maybe you can update me.
Yeah, I'm excited to find out, man. I'm excited to find out. And just see more of America too. It's not just women. I want to see like a lot more of America. The Midwest is not a place I'm familiar with. Closest I've gotten would be like Denver, Colorado.
Okay.
So, but yeah, I'm just excited as well to explore more of Eastern Europe and maybe go to Ukraine next year. I was going to go this year until shit hit the fan and the world was collapsing. More Poland, more of Ukraine, maybe more Croatia. I want to see where my family's from. Most of my family's been there, but I haven't. So I want to go check it out and like see. The women are beautiful. I know that much. I met a few Croatian women in Poland, and I was like, wow, this is awesome. So
yeah. So I wonder when American women hear men saying what you're saying, because you're not the only one saying this. There are a lot of guys saying that your options are better overseas, and you got to be really careful with long distance overseas relationships because it's hard to know somebody. If you're corresponding or you only see each other a couple weeks out of the year, that's very dangerous, potentially dangerous situation. But anyway, a lot of guys are saying women who are not from America are preferable to American women, and I wonder how this strikes American women.
That is a good question. My first thought that came to my head that honestly popped in is that they're just oblivious to it. It's not that they don't even care; it's that they don't really believe it. And I think most Americans, and women included, they just haven't. Their worldview is so fixated on America, which is such a huge country, right? I mean, it's understandable. Never mind. Then what are you going to go visit Canada, which is very similar anyway and stuff. People who go on a cruise to like Mexico, Cozumel for a day. They don't travel and get out and see the world. Or if they do, they just do all kinds of crazy shit on Instagram. But I don't feel like they're not really grasping. They're not venturing to other cultures. Like Eastern Europe is not like, it is westernized to a degree, especially Poland. It's a really nice country, but it's very different from America. It's not like going like I've been to Britain a couple times, the UK. It's not that much different from America. Same with Australia. Obviously, we speak the same language. We share a lot of history and culture together and things like that. And the women, feminism, of course, has infected these countries pretty equally. America, maybe it's the strongest, but the other countries pick up soon behind. But in Central Europe, for example, to give you another one with the woman I met there, they consider themselves Central European, not Eastern European. I don't know what the deal with that is. But in Poland, they make fun of feminism. Like I had with this hat on, I had men and women both ask me if I was a feminist. And I was like, no, not even a little bit. And they go, okay. And because they have an animosity to feminism. It's open. That's socially acceptable, which in America is just non-existent.
What do women find objectionable there about feminism?
I don't even think I ever got to. They make fun of all of it. Okay. I never got, the conversations never got that far. I'd be out drinking or something. Like these weren't like really serious conversations. Mm-hmm. But they just had an animosity to feminism. Even sniffing, they were concerned this "Make Women Great Again" meant feminism, pro-feminism. I'm like, no feminism ever, anti-feminism. And like, oh, okay, yeah, it's awesome, good. And they're just, I think, because of their history with communism and Nazism, the country's been destroyed like so many times and ruled dictatorially by Stalin and the Soviet Union, that they're very, very, very averse to anything that's communist or Marxist or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And they sniff that and they sense that for feminism. They hate it.
Yeah, I would have to imagine that they're very sensitive to these extreme ideologies, which is what feminism has become. It's become a pretty hateful ideology.
I agree.
It's more, it's not even pro-woman, it's just anti-male at this point.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think, J.K. Rowling's trying to figure that out too, with trying to defend women or whatever she thinks with the trans rights stuff and all that. I had another thought on Poland I wanted to get across, but it's slipping my mind at the moment. Anyway, we can get back to it later in the show if we need to. I did want to ask you a question. Here's something that I think a lot of manosphere guys would be interested to know. So you're friends with, and you know pretty well, Dr. Robert Glover and Ken Curry. Both are marriage and family therapists. Dr. Glover, I think, has a PhD in marriage and family therapy. Ken, though, has like a master's in it, and they both practice marriage and family therapy. So for the guys who follow them and know them, particularly Robert Glover, who's super well known from his book that came out a long time ago now, No More Mr. Nice Guy, what is the difference between what you do as a clinician and as a practitioner, as a therapist? What's the difference, like down to the nuts and bolts of what you do versus what Ken and Dr. Glover do? You guys are all buddies. You share a lot of the same. You share a lot of the same ideas and values, but your professions are different. So what's the difference there?
Well, yeah, Robert Glover. Anybody who hasn't read his book, most guys in your audience, I'm sure, have read it. If you haven't read it, you have to read it. He really breaks down the nice guy syndrome, where you end up creating really bad relationships for yourself, and you end up kind of bitter and ugly, and just turn into kind of a mean person. Which is not the person you want to be if you're a nice guy. So anyway, he really focuses on that. Ken Curry, he's in Denver here with me, and he works a lot with men's groups. I don't know if he works much with couples. Maybe he does, but he actually gave me a really interesting lesson yesterday, and I'll lay that on you in a minute if you want. I just happened to have been talking to him yesterday, and sure. What I do when I'm working with couples, I don't work with groups. I work with I still work a little bit with anxiety disorders, although I'm not so much anymore. When I work with couples, I'm not bringing any ideology into the clinic, even though I have been very vocal about the ideology that the APA is putting out there. And if you follow me, you can kind of tell where I stand ideologically if I have an ideology. I don't bring any of that into the clinic. When I'm working with a couple, what I'm doing is helping them identify patterns. And I'm not taking a feminized approach, and I'm not taking an approach that's always going to say the man is right. I'm helping them look at how they've gotten off track. How do we interrupt this pattern and start replacing it with something better? And because I'm non-ideological and I tend to be very, in the clinic anyway, I tend to be pretty disciplined thinker. Like, I want to stick to the facts. Let's not do a lot of emoting here, even though that's a piece of it. Let's get you patched up and
Shawn, you're out of fashion, man. You got to get with the times, dude. You got to be full feminist and full cancel everything you don't agree with.
Yeah. Well, I've certainly cancel everything I disagree with. I've certainly had some failures. Like you can tell when a couple comes in and they're kind of hopeless. I think it's Gottman who outlines the four horsemen of the apocalypse. There's like stonewalling and resentment and so forth. And if you've been doing the work for a while, you can just kind of tell when a couple's done and they're just coming in as a last ditch effort to say that they tried. But
Yeah.
those couples aside, I tend to be pretty successful with my couples just because I'm a stick to the facts kind of guy, and let's get you patched together and out of here. So that's what I do. But you want to hear what Ken was teaching me yesterday?
Yeah, sure.
He was talking about. Let me think about this and gather my thought because I have to remember something I learned yesterday. He was talking about men and women together in relationships, and he was talking about when a woman starts to feel insecure and she starts to feel in danger from whatever it is. There's something in the environment, there's something going on around her that's got her feeling insecure. And her natural inclination might be to try to take power away from her man. So start shaming him, start griping at him, start bringing up stuff from the past. That might be her natural inclination in an attempt to try to feel secure and safe again. And
to trigger him into a strength response where he doesn't go to with that.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
That's the missing piece. And Robert Glover talks a little bit about this too. I think he talks about women being security-seeking creatures. So there's sort of the other side of hypergamy. If women are hypergamous creatures, they're also security-seeking creatures, and so they don't necessarily want to trade up all the time. But anyway, so when women are feeling insecure and they're trying to reestablish that strength in their man, they might go about it by trying to tear him down. And one of the jobs of the man in that situation is to explain it to the woman and say, look, you're trying to tear me down right now. I get what you're trying to accomplish here in the end run, but it's not going to get us there. What I need you to do is get behind me, and I will take care of things, and you will feel secure again. But we're not going to feel secure by you tearing me down. We're going to feel secure by you trusting me. If you don't trust me, that's okay. You can go your own way, but.
So women go on their own way. We've come a long way, Doc.
And Ken didn't say that. That's sort of my interpretation. But there's that freedom there where you can trust me or you can not trust me. But if you're not going to trust me, then we're probably not going to work. And the way he phrased women, the way he explained women trying to reestablish security by tearing their man down.
Yeah,
it's not pathologizing women. It's just talking about a reaction to a situation, and it was a nice lesson.
Yeah. And to a degree, you're saying it's natural, which would be. I agree with you, but that's different, of course, from like a borderline woman with a borderline personality disorder or something similar to that, who's on an unlimited barrage of doing that, which is my understanding. They have the abandonment issues are so deep, they never stop trying to tear you down. They never stop. They never trust you. They never stop the distrust.
Yeah, I would say exactly. Like the insecurity is relentless for somebody who has borderline personality disorder. It's a horrible condition. I don't wish it on anybody.
Yeah. And I guess in manosphere terms, we would say that women like that have that or any symptoms of that, they just shit test endlessly. It just never stops. And I've seen that in my own life with the few women I think I've dated or had sex with that had this. It just never ever stops. It just keeps going, and it's not normal. Like other women don't do that. They, especially in Poland, I would see women. It reminded me of we talked about this earlier with dating women in America and how it's changed over the past 10, 15 years. In the late 2000s, 2008, 2009, the pickup community in the manosphere would talk about shit test. You'd approach a woman and maybe she might shit test you hard. Maybe she didn't and she was in you right away. Maybe she'll just give you a test to play with you and see what you do. And that was normal back then, and it still happens now. What I find in America, though, is that shit test kind of doesn't end. It just keeps going and going, and it ends up in sarcastic insanity. Whereas in the 2000s, it would be hard off the bat maybe, and then 2 minutes into the conversation, it would die off. And she would relax. There would be like a trust element, very basic social trust, right? In Poland, though, I saw this for the first time in a while. I approached a really hot girl at a bar. It was late at night. It was the nicest bar in Warsaw. It was awesome. We got like access to it from these Americans that got us in. These Texans, it was crazy night. It was one of the wildest nights of my life. But I approached this really hot girl, and even in Poland, Polish women in general is really beautiful and fit and put together. So it was extra hot. The shit test came super hard. And I was like, yep, shit test, leaning into this 100%. And sure as shit, it stopped like a minute or two later. And her whole demeanor like changed. Her body language changed. She just relaxed. And I'm like, wow, I haven't seen a shit test that hard from a girl this hot relax in a long time. And I was like, this is a lot more normal back in like 2009, 2010 in America. And that behavior seems to have dissipated. maybe due to Instagram and limited, likes and attention. But that's like one of the things I was kind of referring to is you see that behavior still in Poland and, Eastern Europe or whatever, Central Europe. And in America, it's like, that's really rare now. And it's just weird. It's very weird behavior. Very strange.
Yeah. There's a book out there called Stop Walking on Eggshells. And it's about how to navigate a relationship if you find yourself in a relationship with someone who has borderline personality disorder. And I haven't read the book for a while, but the entire book is very well written. It essentially boils down to you're being shit tested and you need to stop playing the game.
Yeah. Yeah, not a fun game.
Yeah, no, it's not. Do you mind if I ask what was the particular shit test that you got?
I was way too drunk. I have no idea. Right. But it was obvious. She was it wasn't screaming or anything too wild. It was just, an approach. I was pretty assertive with whatever I said and however I looked, whatever was going on. It was verbal. It wasn't anything like running away or anything crazy, right? Nothing. She wasn't like trying to get some man involved or something really extreme. It was just one-on-one. And whatever it was verbal. She spoke English pretty well. Almost all Poles do. A lot better than they think. They're very like shy about it. Anyway, you could feel it was emotionally kind of sharp, and it was, it was, I don't know, whatever she said, man, I was way too drunk. I got really drunk that night. Polish vodka is like, I don't usually like vodka, but Polish vodka is pretty amazing. So no, I don't remember.
Okay.
I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm always embarrassed when someone who speaks another language apologizes for their English and their English is perfect and I don't speak a word of their language. I get kind of sheepish about that.
That's exactly me. Yeah, in Poland. Yep, 100%.
Yeah.
Yep. Another question I wanted to get by you. We have one from the audience here, actually. I don't know I think you can answer this. So he's saying, can you discuss the religion of feminism? I've called religion or feminism the religion of modern women. I don't know if he's inspired by that or not, but do you agree with this statement? And if so, can you dig into this for him?
A little bit. There are some definite religious similarities in the structure where you have the high priest and high priestesses in feminism, and you don't commit blasphemy. But there's a writer out there, and he's very prolific on Twitter, named James Lindsay, and he has really broken down this woke culture, and feminism fits under that in a very articulate way. And he's a good person to read if you really want to look at the religious structure of this movement.
What's his name again?
James Lindsay. I think it's Lindsay.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, with the religion element, what I've said about it, you were saying earlier that religion is feminism has become this very like man-hating thing, and it's not a toxic ideology. I think you described it, or you would. That's how I've described it.
Yeah.
But when I've called feminism the religion of modern women, I view it. There are the high priestesses and priests and the negativity to it and ideology, but I view, on a very basic level, I define it, or I look at feminism as the primary philosophy of women today in America and the West, Canada and stuff, in terms of what they actually think, what they believe, and what they're going to do, like actual major life choices. And that's why I think it's the religion of modern women today. It's what they believe. They act on feminist ideology, whether they know it or not, more than their own, however they were raised, Catholic or Christian or Jewish or whatever. Even more broadly in the culture, they're influenced so heavily by it that they'll delay motherhood from age 20, 21 to 38 years old. And it's like, that's a really serious decision to make, and they don't even think twice about it.
Yeah, it is a really serious decision. And we all meet women who, I meet women who get into their 30s and they start panicking about having kids, and I feel so bad for them. What a rotten position to be in. But the ray of sunshine here is that there are increasing numbers of women who do not want that label attached to them. So that's good.
I think so too. Yeah, I know Milo Yiannopoulos was talking about that years ago. There are studies in the UK that were showing that very few women identify explicitly as a feminist, like 23% or something super low like that. And I think that's good too. I think that's we were talking about earlier. I was saying this: the tyranny sows the seeds of its own destruction, and I hope feminism is doing that. Maybe that's my own bias, my own wish, but there especially recent years, the Me Too and the witch hunt stuff. People really don't like that.
And there are women who don't like that, and there are some fairly vocal women. I couldn't name one right now, but I have seen vocal women that really don't like this piece of the culture. Yep,
Janice Fiamengo was one of them.
Yeah,
obviously. Christina Hoff Sommers, there's a couple like that.
Yeah,
feminism. I liked when I had my interview with Piers Morgan. He asked me. He described me as an abolitionist, that I wanted to abolish feminism, And I was just delighted with that. I had never thought of that on my own. I was like, yes, I'm an abolitionist. I want to abolish this very toxic, negative movement that hurts people, men and women both, in different ways, but very toxic and negative.
Yeah, I think in some ways it hurts women more than men. In some ways,
Yeah.
Getting into your 30s and not even having considered having children until suddenly it's an emergency.
Yep.
That's. I think that's a fairly direct result of feminism, and it's kind of unfortunate.
Yeah, I agree. Another thing too is that with biology and fertility, it's a one-way track for women. It just decreases over time, then kind of has cliffs at 30. Like 90% of their eggs are dead at 30, and I think 95% by like 37 or something. And that has consequences for genetics and pregnancy and geriatric pregnancy and all this stuff. But with men, if we're affected by feminism when we're young, as I was, as most American men are, I think we're raised on a diet of Disney and feminism and blue pill stuff. You can turn that around, and the manosphere is an example that's reached millions of men, tens of millions even. Women can turn it around, but it takes time, and that means at 30-something years old, when you're past the wall and most of your eggs are literally gone or dead, and the ones you have left might be damaged and stuff, or they're not as healthy anyway in terms of the DNA and the chromosomes and stuff. So it's stuck, and they can't undo it as easily because it's physical, and that's it. It's permanent,
It is. And I'm not a traditionalist. I think if a woman would rather have a career than a family, cool. I have no problem with that, but be intentional about it. Like give it some serious thought because it's a big decision.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what ends up happening is most women will the feminists push that and they're like, yeah, I'll just do that. And then of course the 80% of them want to flip that around when they're 35 years old. So yeah, I agree with you. Like I love, my favorite philosopher is Ayn Rand, and she wasn't a mother. Janice Mango, I don't believe is a mother, and she's had a career in academics as a professor in literature and stuff. She's a wonderful lady.
Yeah.
But these things I think were more intentional. I know with Ayn Rand, it was very explicit. She didn't want to have children. And what she did is it influenced millions and millions of people. And that was her legacy she left to the world.
Yeah.
But most of them,
I didn't know. Yeah. I didn't know that she was actively outspoken against having kids for herself.
Yeah. I don't want to overcharacterize it. She wasn't animosity to it, towards it, but she talked about it a little bit. You can look up articles on it. Okay. And she chose not to have children. She was married.
She was intentional about it.
Yes. Good. Yes. And there was, obviously she had a very deep passion for life, for philosophy and writing fiction. And she had a huge career that's well known to this day by presidents and stuff. Mm-hmm. Trump's a fan of the Fountainhead. Paul Ryan was a fan of the Atlas Shrugged. A lot of his politicians and stuff. She's left an impact on the world, but women today do this stuff and they have this dream that they never act on, never take any action towards. And in the meantime, they spend their life on Tinder, getting their organs rearranged, so to speak, and their career is being a manager at Starbucks. Mm-hmm. And it's like you've traded, a life of motherhood and family for nothing. It's like these old biblical tales. You get fooled by the devil. You sell your soul and you get nothing in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think perhaps there's a similar dynamic going on with men where you see a lot of men opting out. And I'm kind of sympathetic because the deck is stacked against you once you sign the contract.
Yeah.
All your options go away. So you better choose wisely. But it's also, it's another big decision that needs to be treated very deliberately and not just as a knee-jerk reaction to what's going on around you, which is sometimes pretty ugly.
Yeah. Final question. You saw, of course, the Make Women Great Again campaign take off earlier this year. I'm sure the news articles, New York Times, New York Post, Piers Morgan. You saw the responses and the backlash to it, which is pretty hysterical and pretty funny. I was enjoying the hell out of it. What was your kind of response to the campaign, and then what you saw on the internet of millions of people just screaming about this and retaliation?
Well, there's the obvious point that there's never a problem with women having opinions about men, but men having opinions about women is apparently controversial. And I know that you're good at marketing. Like, you got yourself on Piers Morgan's show, and I did see that interview, and I was thinking, you idiots, don't you know what he's doing? Don't you see what he's doing to you right now? And they were so worked up, and it was good marketing. But yeah, that double standard where women can have opinions, men can't. Yeah. I have opinions. You have opinions, and you're allowed to have opinions.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really big cornerstone of it. That's what it hit on. I didn't even intend that. I just think it's a great idea. I've loved it since the day I saw it. Before the 2018 convention, like a week before the event, I rush ordered the first hats when I first saw the idea. I just fell in love with it immediately. But a big point, I think that is a huge point, though, and that's what I think Janice Humengo was talking about it on that interview with Piers Morgan and many others, that men are not allowed to have opinions about women, and we're silenced. And I think mansplaining, and that's why I actually called it the mansplaining event of the century. So I did know that element of it, but mansplaining is, I think, an attempt to silence fathers and men, even professionals like yourself, psychologists and doctors and stuff. You're not allowed to have an opinion about women that's not in line with the preordained ministry of propaganda and feminism. Yeah. And the idea that we're going to make women great again, exclusively men too, no women. I mean, it just triggered these people to no end.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
Well, I'll be curious to hear how it goes.
Yeah, I'm excited, man. I'm really excited. Yeah, we almost lost it because of the pandemic. We had to reschedule it, but now it's coming up in October, along with the main events, the Patriarch, and then the main event. So. And
it's coming together okay?
Yeah, I'm excited, man. I'm pumped. I signed for the venue about 2 weeks ago, so I got all ready to go. Found a beautiful one. It's a buyer's market right now, so the hotels are desperate for business, like really desperate. And got a good deal, and everything's coming together awesome. So
these are big contracts you signed. Does that make you nervous?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, they're very serious business contracts. Even if you get a good deal, I mean, it's all kinds of consequences and penalties if you don't meet this criteria with rooms and this and food and beverage and blah blah blah. There's a lot goes into it, and I'm fortunate that I've had a lot of experience at this point. I've stuck to my guns and stuck to the business for 14 years now. Our 14th anniversary is coming up in like another week here in July. But I learned the hard way. I learned, through trial and error and experience as a teenager and then as a young adult. And yeah, but it's serious. I mean, it's the real contracts. They're the biggest contracts to sign. And if you fuck up, there's consequences. So
yeah, I would imagine so. Well, I hope it goes really well.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, we're gonna make women great again, man. It's coming.
Okay.
So, well, thanks for your time. This has been awesome. There's a couple little things here in the chat, but yes, we'll wrap up here. It's been an hour and 40. So appreciate your time, everybody. Make sure you check out his books on Amazon. Oh, you got another minute?
Sure.
Let's finish up with this. Actually, I did want to ask you this. So these are your two books for women. Slightly different titles: The Woman's Guide to How Men Think and The Practical Guide to Men. These are for the ladies out there. Now, I know you've said, and I don't expect a dissertation on it, but that if you were to rewrite these again or provide an updated edition, you would change some things. So for the 2% of viewers who are women watching this, what are some of the basics you would change about these books for women, based on what you know now versus what you did not know when you wrote them?
Wow, that's an interesting question, because one book was trying to help women understand why their men are doing what they're doing sometimes in relationships, and then the other one was about vetting men and making good decisions in relationships, because just like I saw men making mistakes over and over, I saw women making mistakes over and over. Excuse me. So what would I change? I don't, I've thought about that a little bit. I haven't gone back and looked at those books for a while. I think there probably is some stuff that I would change, but maybe not, because the stuff that I was talking about when I wrote those books was about, for example, with vetting men, you're going to want to find somebody who has a sense of purpose, because if he doesn't have a sense of purpose, he's going to be lost. And if he's lost, he's not going to be very effective in his relationship. And so, it was absolutely unapologetic about masculinity, and I'd certainly stick with that. And I don't know if there's some little specifics that I might change. I might have to go back and revise those at some point.
Yeah, nice. So it's an updated edition. It's possible in the future. Good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, if they do come out, I'll buy them, so I can have a huge stack of your books continuing to build up.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I have not read those two yet as of yet, but at some point, eventually, when I buy books, I tend to take like a year or two to read them, which is, I don't know if that's ridiculous or not, but that's my habit for life. But eventually I read them.
Yeah, so, the same way. They sit around for a while before I get to them. Yeah, so much to read out there.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff. It's a good world we live in if it doesn't burn down.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your time. It's been awesome having you back on the show. I think the guys enjoyed it a lot, and look forward to having you on in the future at some point. And I really appreciate your time, man. Big time. Where can people find out about you too?
Oh, I'm on Twitter at Iron Shrink, and I have a website, docsmith.co.
Okay.
And it's great to see you, Anthony.
Yeah, man, 100%. And everybody, make sure you pick up his books on Amazon, including his lesser well-known ones, The User's Guide to the Human Mind. And if you just go on Amazon and search Shawn Smith, can't even talk today, you'll find all these hidden books that are not the Tactical Guide to Women, because I'm sure most of you already own that book, and if you don't, you should go buy it immediately. So without further ado, again, Shawn, thanks for being on the show, and we'll wrap up here.
All right, much appreciated.